The Bike Club podcast is a collaboration between Beth Curran and Akshaya Parthasarathi.
The Bike Club podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land we record on. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging.
Welcome to Bike Club, a tech podcast crafted by the girls for the girls. Our mission to elevate, educate, and explore the exciting world of technology.
So tune in and remember, the first rule of Bike Club is to talk about Bike Club. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Bike Club podcast. It's been a little bit of a break since we've talked to everyone.
A little unannounced one.
Yeah, we decided to take a bit of a mid-season break. So we've had 6 episodes and we're going to have another 6 episodes coming out over the next couple of months, I guess. So yeah, we just took a little break. We both had some stuff going on in our personal lives. We're busy. Actually, you went overseas. Can you?
Yes, I did. I had a quick little trip back home. And I just, we weren't exactly the freest in our schedules to just record and everything. So yeah.
Where is home for you, for the listeners who don't know?
Home's actually a mix of India and Dubai, which is where I spent the time. So it was like a good 3-week vacation. So yeah, it was nice.
But yes, we are back and we'll have another 6 episodes coming out. And that'll be our season 1, and then we'll move into hopefully season 2 and beyond after that.
Yes, and we've got plenty of exciting ideas for the next 6. We don't know how we're gonna put it all into just the last 6, but yeah, we're gonna try.
Yeah, we've got plenty of content. Not gonna run out. To kick off this episode, Akshaya, do you want to tell us the rule?
Yes, so the rule for this episode is we don't gatekeep information from other girlies. So I think it just, there's just this perceived competition that's constantly surrounding us. And I think we're just geared to be to each his own attitude on a daily basis. But apparently that serves nobody. Who would have thought, right?
Yeah, no one.
So I say that we stop gatekeeping information. And this could be any bit of information, right? So like the other day, I realized I was reading this really good book and just an article on financial advice. And that's something, now these are topics that are not generally discussed with women in a very social setting, simply because it's just not how it was for a very long time. So I say that if you've come across information, whether it's via a book, an article, a video, whatever it may be, just make sure to pass it on to anybody who you think would find that interesting, or even who you think that, should know this kind of information. And that way, I feel like we're also just in the larger aspect building a much more stronger community where we're just supporting each other. And who knows, like the stuff that you're sharing might actually be the kind of questions that they wanted to ask, but maybe were too embarrassed to even approach it.
Yeah.
And now they have it answered. So yeah, don't get
it's really easy to just be like, everyone around me knows all this stuff, and like I don't know how everyone, like it's easy to kind of imagine that other people are so much more knowledgeable, but actually when you all share and then there's the collective knowledge is so much greater. It's really important, like within companies as well. Like obviously there's a certain level of like confidentiality and stuff that you shouldn't be going around telling everyone everything, but I think like as co-workers for us, I think being transparent about how we're going at work and like even like salary and like all the kind of growth stuff that we're doing, I think that can be really important, because then you're not like competing against each other. It's like us together trying to build the best workplace that we can, and I think that's really crucial. But it can be easy, especially in tech, I feel like, to be like, I could get ahead and I've got to like not tell anyone about, or like I've got to try and get a better salary than other people, I've got to try and do this and this and like keep all these secrets, like
but we're just taught generally to keep to ourselves and to not discuss these kind of things, but we need to start breaking out of that and just sharing it. It goes beyond the workplace. It could be about actually anything, any kind of information that you come across, maybe like a philosophical idea itself, and be like, hey, here's this cool piece of information which I don't know, probably makes you think a little different about certain something. News articles even, because
Mm.
Who knows? We're not up to date about everything. So yeah, I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, it is really good advice because I think the instinct societally is to be like, this is all for me and I have to keep it.
Yeah, I have to safeguard it. My precious. Yeah.
Yep. Alrighty. Well, I might kick off my report then.
Mm.
This is another person who, my very first episode, I did Katie Bauman, who was a big inspiration for me in terms of her work with computing and astrophysics and that kind of stuff.
Yep.
This is another person who I discovered early on in my career and was one of the first people who I was like, oh wow, like there's such an amazing woman in science. And she's still very much active, like she's still working in her field now. And she's also, I think, our first Sydney-based scientist. So
Oh,
she's
wow.
she's actually based out of UNSW. Yeah, so the person I'm talking about is Michelle Simmons.
Mm,
I don't know if you've heard of her,
I have not.
but she's an incredible quantum physicist and also works in the field of quantum computing.
Ah,
So she's been very foundational in the field of actually building quantum computers. Yeah, we've kind of talked about quantum computing like offhand, I feel like in almost every episode we've talked about so far.
kind of, yeah. And
But
it was
at
covered
the
with
end
our
we're
guest
always like
episode.
it probably has applications in quantum computing, but I'm like, we should probably actually talk about quantum
Co-
computing and like what it is.
Yeah,
Because it is kind of a big like buzzword in the tech space, but I
for
feel like
sure.
it's
Yeah,
not,
especially now. Yeah.
yeah, it's not super well understood, and people just kind of think of it as like it's just like a mega computer.
Yeah, that's
Um,
exactly the picture in my head. It's just one
yeah,
room and this massive computer from,
yeah,
I don't know, straight out of a Doctor Who episode or something.
yeah, like it's just like like a super fast computer. It's just yeah. So I'm keen to talk about that, but I will talk about Michelle herself first. But yeah, I'm really excited. I had so much fun looking into this. This is one of the first computing topics that I really like latched onto when I was younger, like when I was kind of studying and I started to think like, oh, computing's actually really interesting.
Hmm.
Because I never thought it was that interesting when I was younger, and then I kind of started to see how it all might work. So yes, I'll jump into that. So Michelle is originally from the UK. She says she grew up in a relatively kind of rough area, around, I believe it was around the London area. And yeah, so she wasn't in a space that was overly like academically competitive. So, like her school wasn't like super academically strong. And I actually related a lot to this part of her story
I
because
think, yeah, I remember you telling me
yeah,
about your
which I
school.
didn't know
Yeah.
until I went back and reread this. So, sorry, sidebar. A lot of the information for this is coming from a Cosmos magazine article that I actually read all the way back in 2016 when I
Oh,
was first
wow.
getting into when I was in high school and I was first getting into science, and I would like ride my bike to the newsagents and buy like science magazines
Wow,
and bring them home and read them on the
back when you
weekends.
actually had to purchase
I
hard
know.
copy of things.
I was such a little nerd. But this was and Cosmos is a great science magazine in Australia if anyone's interested. But yeah, there's this whole spread on her. So a lot of the stuff I'm getting out of here, just for reference, I'll try and find it if it's online and link it. But yes, I related to it a lot, and I actually had forgotten about that aspect, and I wonder if that's what kind of grabbed me about it when I first read it when I was actually in high school, because yeah, my the school that I went to was like it was a great school, but it wasn't very academically competitive. Like my year group was only 40 people,
Hmm.
and I was one of the only ones who was doing like physics and chemistry. And she talks about how in her last 2 years, so year 11 and 12, her school was trialing independent learning, which
Okay.
basically meant that she was left by herself to do
To study
year
whatever
11 and
she
12
wanted.
chemistry,
Yeah, okay.
which I was like, I relate to that hard because in year 12, it was me and like a couple of other guys in a physics class, and then the only physics teacher we had at my school left.
Oh, wow.
And so, and they didn't have
Quite
time to
literally
replace,
independent learning.
yeah, they didn't have time to replace him. So our senior biology teacher came and taught the physics class, and he's not a physicist. And like he was amazing, like I love him, he was great. But it was basically me and him like going through the curriculum together
Hmm.
and like trying to figure it out like on our own. So I was like, I related to that a lot. And she talks about how like it was an experience that forged her self-reliance, and that's something that's carried her through her career.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, that was the environment she had, and she talked about how her parents were very driven people. Like her dad was a police officer, and like they were very kind of like you got to get in there and do it kind of people. So she had that drive and that support from home. But after she went to school, she went to, I believe it was Durham University, and did her undergrad, and then she went and she got a PhD, where she got to work with NASA, which is really cool. So she was really interested in space stuff, but her kind of focus was in nanotechnology and like quantum physics and physical chemistry, that kind of stuff. And so she got to work with NASA in her PhD looking at solar cells.
Okay.
So building like a solar cell is just like the basic component of how a solar panel works in terms of like capturing energy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so she was working on that. And then in this article from Cosmos, it talks about how during her PhD supervisor actually passed away in like a tragic accident. Um, and yeah, really crazy. It just says that he drowned. Yeah,
Oh,
so
wow.
that would really be a difficult thing to go through
And
in your PhD, I think.
that's like through her while she was getting the PhD?
Yeah. So
Oh
while she was
no.
working on it, and so then she
Oh.
had to be like, okay, am I gonna stick with this? Am I gonna like change universities? Like, am I gonna change my PhD? What am I gonna do? But she decided to stick with it. She ended up having to kind of shift her thesis a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But she ended up building a solar cell with record efficiency at that time. So she was already pretty successful in her early research. She then went on to Cambridge for a while and worked on transistors, which I'll get into a little bit later, but
Mm-hmm.
some of the fundamental building blocks of computers.
Yep.
Um, and she specifically worked on silicon transistors, because silicon is a very stable material. Yeah, very accomplished. And then in 1999, she got a call from UNSW, to say, can you please come and head up our quantum and like material department?
Oh, that's cool.
Um, so that's how she ended up there. And then her research at ARC, which is the Australian Research Council,
Okay.
um, was in like her big thing that she's known for is for developing the first stable single atom transistor.
Okay.
So again, I'll kind of get into what that means in a
Yep.
minute, but it basically is like one of the most fundamental pieces of a quantum computer,
Mm-hmm.
and like it's the thing that unlocks all of this technology. And so she and her team pioneered this technology. They pioneered the methodology. And it's pretty interesting because like you hear so much buzz around quantum computing now, but when I was researching this, a lot of the videos of her first talking about it are from like 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Like she was really like one of the early pioneers of this technology, and yeah, it's pretty incredible. She's won like a bajillion different awards and merits. Like she has like an Order of Australia, which is like a super high up, like the Queen awards it. Oh, sorry, the King now awards it.
Yeah.
She has the Prime Minister's Prize for Science. She won the Feynman Award, the Feynman Prize, sorry, the Eureka Prize, Royal
Wow.
Society of New South Wales Prize. Like it's
She's
pretty
very
impressive.
accomplished. Yeah.
Yes, and
And
she's been Australian of the Year
oh
in
wow.
2018. She was Australian of the Year, so pretty amazing.
Damn. So she's
Um,
still teaching at UNSW or researching?
yeah, so she's in research. I think she does teach a little bit, but she's very busy.
How
Because
exciting.
she heads up the Center of Excellence for Quantum Computation and Communication Technology, which is pretty cool. And then she also has her own company. So there's that research division of UNSW, or sorry, which is like the Australian Research Council at UNSW.
Mm-hmm.
She's obviously a professor of quantum physics at UNSW, and then she also has a company called Silicon Quantum Computing.
Oh.
And that's actually an independent company. They do work with UNSW, but they're working to build the first like commercial quantum computers, I guess, sort of.
Hmm.
I say commercial, like not in the sense that everyone will
Everybody in
have
an
one in their
office is going to
house.
use
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
not like we're building iPhones, but
Yeah.
like a reproducible kind of machine.
Aspect. Yeah, got
Um,
it. Okay.
yeah. So they have some kind of long-term goals. They say enabling access to quantum computing solutions for a broad audience across multiple use cases by 2030.
Mm.
So that's kind of a bit of a benchmark.
It's not too far
Uh,
off.
No, it's not too far off. So yeah. And I actually, when I was studying at Macquarie, studying physics, I knew a couple of people who met her, because I knew people who were in the quantum, like who were doing the quantum pathway.
Right.
Um, and they got to do some research with her, or not like directly with her, but with people who worked with her at UNSW. And there's a lot of like cross university research that happens. Apparently she's lovely. I've never met her, but I was very jealous when I had people come to class and be like, I got to meet Michelle Simmons the other day, and I was like, what? So maybe I should have gone down the quantum path so I could
Yeah.
meet these cool people.
Just
But
16-year-old Beth clutching that little
I
magazine.
know, I was like, oh my God, that's so
Oh,
cool.
how exciting though.
Um,
Yeah.
so that's kind of a bit of her story. She's also a mom. She's like 3 kids. Yep.
Oh.
Which is amazing. And she's very passionate about like education and accessibility. One of the things I read was that she's actually spoken out a lot about um, women in tech and women in STEM,
Mm-hmm.
and specifically in quantum physics, especially because it's such a mathsy um,
Yeah, and
field.
just
It's easy.
completely, yeah, it's just so
Yeah.
inaccessible even with just the term.
Yeah. And she criticized in 2017, and I remember this happening because I graduated in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
She publicly criticized the lowering of standards in physics education in the HSC, which is the New South Wales school leaving certificate that I did.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so in an this is from the Department of Education. In an effort to make physics more appealing to girls, they substituted mathematical problem solving with qualitative responses,
Mm.
which is a bit like, and they tried to like feminize the curriculum by
It
making it
could,
less
what?
mathsy,
What did
which
they
is
do?
like basically what they did is they made it more, and it was already a bit like this when I studied it, but it was less like, how
Challenging?
do I solve this problem mathematically, and more like, who was the person who discovered this thing, and what was this impact on society, and what was this physical, like, you know what I mean? Like it's those kind of like almost like history of physics and like
Right. Yeah.
theory of physics as opposed to like, how do I solve this problem
Applications of it.
mathematically?
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I kind of understood why they did it because a lot of people who did physics were already doing like super high level maths, like they were doing like, 4 units of maths as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, oh, it's just more maths. But like it didn't, yeah. A lot of my university professors when I first started were not happy about it because it meant that people were then coming into uni less
Without
prepared.
knowing how to apply the
Yeah,
concept of mathematics and physics.
exactly,
That makes
exactly. They've
sense.
like
Yeah.
they're interested in physics, but they haven't done the physics maths.
Yeah.
Um,
That would be like a
and
waste
so
of the first year of university.
yeah,
Yeah.
she kind of spoke out against that in terms of the general curriculum change, but also
Oh,
this
good on
idea
her.
that like maths is less feminine. Like it was a really strange, like, yeah, it's like
That
it
is
kind of
so
came from a
strange.
good intention, but it was like a weird choice that was made. Anyway,
Yeah.
so I think they're always updating the curriculum, and I feel like every couple of years it's like the new science curriculum for, so who knows where that'll go. But a quote that I saw from her is, "Don't live your life according to what other people think. Go out there and do what you really want to do." Seeing women in leadership roles and competing internationally is important. It gives them the sense that anything is possible,
Oh,
um, which I love, and it's probably maybe the quote that I'll put on Instagram as our like
for
our
the
quote
episode? Yeah, for
of the
sure.
episode from our
Yeah.
person. But yeah, I think that's everything I have for her in terms of her like biography. Obviously, there's a lot of other stuff out there. She's yeah, the like list on Wikipedia of like the things that like the awards and stuff that she's gotten is crazy. And I listened to a few interviews with her, and she seems like just like a really kind of down to earth person. Like she's got that kind of like just get in and do it attitude,
Mm-hmm.
is what she's passionate about. And another thing that I resonated with from her is she was talking about the importance of diversity in science, which we talked about a bit on the podcast as well, in terms of like when you're doing science, you need multiple different perspectives to kind of build forward. Because if you only have one way of looking at it, then you're never going to kind of make a breakthrough. And so she was saying the importance of diversity on her team at the research center that she's at is like super important to her. Not
Mm-hmm.
in just like a we're diverse, yay, brownie
Yeah,
points
like a
kind of
brand.
way, but in
Yeah.
like a we need different ways of thinking to actually make progress. So yes, yes, that's my little biography of Michelle Simmons.
That was a lovely report.
Amazing lady, very
Yeah.
very inspirational.
Okay. I don't want to make any assumptions, Beth, but I do think you're going to teach us about transistors.
Yes, I am. It's part of what I'm going to teach you about.
Okay.
So yeah, I just want to give a disclaimer. I feel like I do this every episode because I'm like, I'm not an expert, because I feel like some quantum person's gonna listen to this and be like, oh my gosh, that's so not how it
That's
works.
fine. That's fine.
So I'm sorry in advance. But yes, I'm gonna talk a little bit about basically like what is the difference between a classical computer and a quantum computer,
Oh,
and a couple of kind of concepts in quantum physics that make that possible.
okay.
Um, just to start with as a baseline, so classical computers work on bits of information,
Mm-hmm.
like our name, Byte Club.
Yeah.
So you've got basically zeros and ones, right?
Yeah.
And everything in a classical computer is coded in a zero, like a pattern of zeros and ones,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how they hold information. And so information is stored in the combinations of the on and off states, right? So say if I have 2 bits, which is, so I can have a 0 and a 1, I can have 0, 0, I can have 1, 1,
Mm-hmm.
or I can have 1, 0.
Yeah. One
Just trying to
zero zero
remember all
one.
the
Yeah.
combinations of 2 things. And so that's 4 possible states,
Okay.
right? And those states hold 2 pieces of information,
Right.
right? So the 2 pieces of information are the state of the first bit, which
Okay.
is either 0 or 1, and the second piece of information is the state of the second bit, which is either
Yeah.
0 or 1. So hold that in your head. 2 bits, 2 pieces of information. That's kind of the basis of how data is stored in a classical computer.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that these functionally work is through a transistor,
Yeah.
which is basically just like a switch. And it's just a switch that is either on or off, so either 0 or 1. And the more transistors you have, the more complex data you can hold,
Okay.
because the more bits you have, the more information you can store, and it just grows exponentially. So if you have millions of bits,
Mm-hmm.
then you have millions of different combinations which can represent different numbers, images, etc. Like I mean, I'm kind of extrapolating from like the very smallest version of, how computers work up to the biggest, but that's where it's helpful to think about in terms of quantum computing. So you've got your bits, but basically what's happening is that as computers have gotten smaller and smaller, and
Mm-hmm.
we've wanted to have transistors be smaller and smaller, so that we can fit more inside like an iPhone, right?
Right.
Like you
Yeah.
want to be able to fit millions and millions of transistors on one chip so you can hold as much information as possible in the smallest possible space. We're coming up against this really weird issue. I mean, apart from just like the physical limits of what we can manufacture,
Mm-hmm.
like there's already chips that are like, smaller than a coin that hold millions of transistors. But beyond that, when you start getting down to transistors that are almost like a few atoms big, like they're down near the atomic scale,
Wow. Okay.
yeah, so and we have that, but you start getting this issue called quantum tunneling, which
Mm-hmm.
is this really weird thing where a transistor, the way that it's an on or off switch, it's basically a flow of electrons. So it either is allowing electrons through or it's not allowing electrons through. That's like a basic circuit, right? Is it
Okay.
allows the flow of energy or it doesn't.
Energy or not? Yeah.
Yep. So when it's off, nothing should be coming through. When
Mm-hmm.
it's on, stuff should be coming through. It's like just like a light bulb, you can imagine, like the power is flowing through it or it's not
Mm-hmm.
flowing through it. So, but what happens with quantum tunneling is you get this really weird effect where because quantum particles are kind of like unstable, they're kind of like a cloud of probabilities, which is a really strange concept. But sometimes in a small enough system, the particles can like kind of jump. Like they can, even if it's closed, they can kind of jump across anyway because it's
Okay.
like an unstable system. And so basically what it means is that then you don't have like a sealed switch. You have a switch that becomes kind of like muddy because things can sort of, when it's off, they might still get through. And so you have sort of this unclear signal, and that is
Mm-hmm.
basically what determines the minimum size, the minimum limit of a classical computer, is how
Okay.
small you can make it without getting these weird atomic effects where
The
electrons just
muddy
start
part.
jumping
Okay.
around.
Right.
Yeah. Scientists looked at this and they were like, well, what if we designed a computer that actually makes use of these properties
Mm.
instead of trying to work against them, right? So what if we tried to work with the atomic weirdness instead of trying to fix it?
Set the limit.
Because
Use that as a limit.
yeah, so we'll use it as a limit in classical computing, and we won't keep trying to use this same method and forcing it smaller and smaller.
Okay.
We'll try and come up with something different. I'm going to now explain a couple of different quantum physics concepts.
Okay.
And if this doesn't make sense to you, that's fine because every quantum physics professor I've ever met also says it doesn't make sense to them. Um, and
Oh, that
so
explains. Yeah. Okay.
yeah, there's a really great Richard Feynman quote where he says, "You don't understand quantum physics, you just get used to it."
Okay.
And so it's like no one really understands how it
Quantum
works.
physics.
We're
Got
all
it.
just kind of
Yeah.
like, okay,
Okay. So
I
just
guess
I'll
that's
just
what it
smile and
does.
wave through this. Okay.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So the first important piece of information is the idea of quantum superposition.
Mm-hmm.
And you might have heard this word being thrown around. But it's basically this idea of like with a classical bit, it can either be 0 or 1, right? Like it's binary, like it's
Yeah.
either it's not in between.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with what we call a qubit, so a quantum bit, it has what we call spin.
Okay.
And the way that I've had professors describe spin to me is imagine a ball that's spinning, except that it's not a ball and it's not spinning,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
which is,
Cool.
super helpful and clear.
Yeah.
Um, and basically, the spin is just how we describe the state of this particle.
So it's state and stateful and stateless at the same time.
So instead of being 0 or 1, it's like everything in quantum physics works on probabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like it's 70% 1 and 30% 0.
Okay.
Or and it's like it has these shades of varying spin. It's not just 0 and 1, it's like way more variables in between. It's like a spectrum.
Okay.
If you imagine it like a dial that you can turn around.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, and it's not just that it's not that it's a dial, it's that it exists on multiple points of the dial at the same time. So
Okay.
that's where the superposition comes in, right? Like, is it's like the one state is superimposed with the zero state
Mm-hmm.
at the
Mm-hmm.
same time. You can kind of put probabilities to it. You can say it's mostly in the one state, but a bit in the zero state, or it's mostly in the zero state, but a bit in the one state. And this
Okay.
is where kind of your brain breaks a little bit because it's like we're used to
How
things
okay.
being
Yeah,
binary.
X or Y.
Like,
Yeah, binary. Yeah.
yeah, but this is like the smallest possible, thing,
Deviation. Yeah.
and it has all this variety in it, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
So that's superposition. And the other thing that they make use of in quantum computing is entanglement, which is another buzzword that you might have heard around. And
Okay.
entanglement is basically where the state of one quantum particle affects the state of another. And so you can sort of chain them along and you end up with these, like, I guess, sort of like a circuit of particles
Okay.
where they're all connected. This is really interesting behavior because they're connected in a different way to how traditional, like a molecule is connected through like a chemical bond. They're almost connected like telepathically. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's really wacky. Like this is one of those things that you learn about it and you're like, surely not. Like, surely
The
no.
molecules are connected telepathically.
Atoms.
Oh, the
Yeah,
oh
so smaller.
yeah. Oh,
So individual, like, yeah, it's nuts. So
that's
quantum particles, in theory, you can have quantum particles that are hundreds of kilometers away from each other, but if
okay.
they're entangled, the state of one will instantaneously affect the state of the other.
Okay.
It's really bizarre. Like, it's one of those things that's like, you ask any professor about it and they're like, I don't know, man, it's just weird. But
Okay.
like we're trying to use it. So yeah. And one of the things that Michelle talked about, I think it was a quote from someone, but I don't remember who the quote was originally from. But she was talking about this idea that we can only understand science as deeply as we can replicate it.
Hmm.
So we can only understand a concept as deeply as we can rebuild it ourselves,
Yeah.
basically, which makes sense. Like you think if
Yeah.
if you really understand something, you should be able to put it back
Put
together
it
by
back
yourself.
together. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And
Yeah.
so that's where our understanding of quantum for so long has been just maths and just theory and just these crazy ideas that it's like, okay, I guess that's how it works. But quantum computing is the first field where we're trying to actually take those ideas and use them and practically build stuff with them. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's kind of pushing the limits of our understanding, right? So we're kind of working with concepts that we don't even fully know how to conceptualize,
Mm-hmm.
but we're trying to use them to build something
Right. Yeah.
in order to better understand them. So that's the two concepts, the superposition and the quantum entanglement. Don't stress too much about the entanglement. I'm not really going to get into how that works because I don't really know. Um, but it is something that they're trying to leverage to make these quantum computers. But for the superposition, what this means is that when you have two bits, it could be in each of them has those superimposed states.
States. Yeah.
And so if you look at, say, we talk about spin, we talk about spin up and spin down. So you can imagine that as like 0 and 1, basically. Yeah. And so when you have 0 and 1, you've got your 0, 0, your 1, 0, your 1, 1, and your 0, 1.
Okay.
Um, So you've got your 4 and you've got two pieces of information. So then when you have spin, you have up, up, down, down, up, down, down, up. So
Right.
again, similar combination, just like zeros and ones.
Okay.
Um, but instead of being restricted to one of these states, those two particles together are in sort of a combination of the states. So
Okay.
it's like they're 10% in up, up, 20% in down, down, 60% in up, down, and then what have I left over? 10% in down, up.
Okay.
And so, yeah, so instead of bits holding two pieces of information, to describe that system, you actually need four pieces of information. So you
Okay.
need the, I guess, the percentage, and it's not quite a percentage, it's other math stuff, but you need sort of the percentage of what each of those states is.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to know how much
Of
is
each
it up,
state.
up? How
Right.
much is
Okay.
it up, down? How much is
Okay.
it,
Yeah.
and that's something that is shifting and changing all the time.
Okay.
But so instead of encoding two pieces of information with a 0 and a 1, you've basically got four pieces of information.
Mm-hmm.
And at a small scale, it's kind of like, okay, well, 2 and 4, it's not that different.
Mm-hmm.
But if you scale it up, and then imagine you have, instead of just 2-bit or qubits, quantum bits, you have 100 qubits,
Mm-hmm.
and you need to know the coefficient of like the percentage attributed to all of those
All 100
states.
of them. Oh, that's insane.
Yeah. Then the maths works out to be that the amount of equivalent information that you get from qubits versus regular bits is 2 to the power of n,
Oh my
where
God.
n is the number of like the amount of regular information you would get. So if you think 2 to the power 2, like 2 squared
Yeah.
is 4. So it's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, that's not that much.
Yeah.
But then it goes like rapidly up. So if you can imagine 2 to the power of 100,
It's exponential. Yeah.
it's exponential, like it's
Yeah.
billions. It's crazy. I can't even conceptualize those numbers. And so then, there's companies now who are saying they have 300 qubit processors, which is like insane.
So
So,
I think just to wrap my head around it, it's basically if a classical computer can get you a piece of information relayed, which is like that information, if it's n,
mhm,
then a quantum computer basically takes that and does just that 2 raised to exponential worth of that processing.
yes, exactly.
Whoa.
Yeah. So quantum computers are actually quite small. So, when you think of like a supercomputer and it's like an entire
You
room.
imagining I'm imagining something massive sitting in like
Yeah.
a room by itself.
But the equivalent that you need in terms of qubits versus bits is so much smaller because it is that, exponential curve of how much data it can handle at once because it's just holding so much more information. Yeah, it's really fascinating. And like the way that they do this, the way that Michelle pioneered this technique is like, okay, well, that's all well and good in theory, but how do I actually get a qubit? Like, like, we know how to make bits because it's just a circuit switch. Like, it's just a
Mm-hmm.
light on off, right? It's a
Mm-hmm.
transistor. How
Yeah.
do I actually make a quantum transistor,
Qubit.
like
Yeah.
a qubit that functionally works? And I won't fully get into the way that Michelle did that because I feel like I've already probably covered too much ground with the quantum stuff.
Yeah, you've blown my
But
mind enough.
basically, they use silicon because it's a very stable material, and they have this really interesting method where they will inject one atom, one phosphorus atom, into the silicon, like, I guess, matrix, like field, and then they have that isolated, and so then they can manipulate, like, pass a charge into that atom that then feeds back into a circuit. So it's really interesting. So it's like you've got these individual little qubits that then have to feed back into another system that has to like interpret the information, and there's all these crazy algorithms in terms of like understanding the coefficients and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, basically the long and short of it is take what a classical computer can do and scale it up like exponentially.
Hmm.
Because instead of being locked into this binary, you now have this like wave of this spectrum of states. It's almost like if you imagine it like colors, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like in classical bits, you can either have red or blue.
Mm-hmm.
And you can have all red, you can have some red then some blue, you can have some blue then some red, or you can have all blue. And so it's like those are your only options. But in quantum computing, it's more like you can have infinite shades, right, of different combinations of how much red and how much blue. Like you can imagine there's infinite purples in the conceivable kind of spectrum. And
Okay.
so you just have so much more to work with. But yes, I'll put some resources in the description if you want to
Yeah,
watch
I
some
feel like
videos and things.
yeah, I feel like these kind of things, because when you're describing the aspect of injecting a silicon, I feel like they really need that level of visualization because
Yeah.
it's so hard to picture how they're putting all this information
Yeah.
inside of just I don't know, like electrical components, I guess.
Yeah. The way
Yeah.
I picture it is just like imagine like a bunch of like a grid
Okay.
of like one color and then just like one point on that grid, they're just like zoop, there's that atom. They just like drop it in
That
to
is
like
so
the one spot.
insane. That's
Yeah,
actually
it's
so
crazy.
insane.
And they have to
Yeah.
build all these like
So
specialist
this is
microscopes
basically
and
what
things. Like,
companies like
yeah.
IBM and Intel are into, right, all the time.
Yeah, they're trying to do.
Yeah.
They're trying to build it at scale. Um,
Wow.
and yeah, they're trying to build it so that it's stable. And one of the big challenges with quantum computing is that in order to do this kind of precision manipulation of atoms, where
Mm-hmm.
you can move an atom into a specific location and then monitor it, stuff has to be at like almost absolute zero temperatures. Like
Mm-hmm.
it has to be like the coldest you can get it because the way that atoms work is that their energy, like their heat energy, is translated into movement in the atom.
Okay.
And so like atoms that are hotter are atoms that are moving around more. And so you need to have it at like pretty much absolute zero, like as cold as you can possibly get it in order to do these manipulations, because otherwise everything's just moving around too much.
Okay.
And so that's one of the challenges with quantum computing is getting it to work at room temperature, which hasn't been achieved so far. So far, everything is still being done at super low temperatures in these like frozen chambers.
Okay.
And then those results and those the algorithms and stuff that they're running are being then pumped out of the computer, using other systems.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's really interesting. It's a really fascinating field. It is genuinely like pushing the boundaries of like what we even understand of the quantum world.
Mm-hmm.
And Michelle talks about it as like the closest version of practical perfection you can get. Like it's
Okay.
like because it is literally like the finest, type of manipulation you can try and do. And so I
With
think she's
matter.
really
Yeah,
driven by that.
exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, like I can manipulate matter to like the finest, like I can get it absolutely perfect, which is very cool, but would also be incredibly frustrating. Like spending, this has been her whole career. Um, and it's such a fine precision thing to
Mm-hmm.
do. So
Oh my God.
anyway, so
Yeah, but it's so fascinating. I mean, you did a great job trying to break it down. But of course, like concepts like quantum computing, I feel like it definitely just requires a little bit of homework on your own. So I'm looking forward to reading all the stuff that you put up.
yeah, I'll link some videos. There's some really good ones like Veritasium and Kurzgesagt and a bunch of those different ones that are really good.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it is like, and that's what I said at the start. The kind of disclosure is like, you don't understand quantum physics, you just get used to it. You just kind of
Yeah.
like go, okay, I guess there's two states in one state,
Okay,
and
cool.
I guess that's how it works. Like it's pretty nuts. I
Okay.
mean, there's whole fields of maths that have been invented to like try and deal with this stuff. So.
Wow. Okay. Cool. Wow. Well, thanks, Beth. Okay. So obviously, I believe we're not going to use quantum computers for your good old Google searches. So do you want to like
No,
tell us
no.
what it
Yeah,
might
so
actually have applications for?
yeah. And that's one of the big things is that people are like, quantum computers are just gonna be super fast computers. And
Yeah.
for the purposes of like most of the stuff that we do with computers now, they're not actually gonna really change things. Like it's not gonna make, I don't know, watching YouTube more high definition, or like it's not gonna like make your
My
calculator
Netflix
do
is gonna
addition
be so
faster.
much better. Yeah.
Like all of those things are sufficiently supported with the software that we have. Like,
Yeah.
but what it is for, as we were talking about before, you've got, the equivalent amount of data that it can handle and that it can hold at one time is exponentially more. And so it's largely going to be really useful for querying really large data sets to the point that calculations or searches that might have taken years on a supercomputer can take minutes or hours. And so
That's insane. That's
it's
actually
crazy.
insane.
It's
That's
crazy. Like
crazy. Yeah.
it's hard to even conceptualize like how much faster it can be.
Yeah.
And so it's really for research applications.
Mm-hmm.
And for yeah, querying and like synthesizing massive data sets. And as our data collection methods are getting more and more sophisticated, we are getting larger and larger data sets available to us. And as we have more storage available, we're getting large data sets. And so it gets to a point where it's just not feasible for a classical computer. Like it's just you'd have to run a model for, yeah, 10 years in order
Okay.
to actually ingest and understand all of the data that is available, right? But with a quantum computer, you can do that at scale and fast. And so that's one of the main applications. And that has applications in so many different things, like simulations, like space research, where you can synthesize like astronomical data from hundreds of telescopes, observing millions of points of data
Mm-hmm.
for years, and you can synthesize all that data quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Things like genetic research, where you can process genetic codes. And so they think that there's going to be lots of really incredible applications in medicine and building new drugs and looking at different chemical structures that we've never considered before. And one of the other things is actually, kind of as I was saying before, simulating the quantum world.
Right.
So, because the quantum world is so weird and behaves in all these strange ways, it's been really hard to build simulations of them. Like a lot of the work that is done in astronomy and other fields of physics is building a machine that you basically like input like if gravity equals this much and speed equals this much, show me the path of the planet.
Yeah.
Um, and because that's classical physics, you can code that in with, some differential equations and it's like it's not like trivial, but it's not hard.
Right.
Um, in terms of like functionally, can the computer do it? I personally couldn't do it, but can the computer do it? Yes. Whereas for quantum stuff, the behavior is just so different, and the behavior itself relies on all of these different states and probabilities and simultaneous actions that quantum computers are potentially going to be able to run simulations that we just can't even imagine on classical computers. And so as we're building these quantum machines, we're understanding more about quantum physics
Mm-hmm.
because we're pulling it apart and putting it back together, sort of thing. But we're also opening up avenues to even understand it further and to use some of the scientific techniques that we haven't been able to use in this field before um, on a machine. So that's really fascinating. Then the other big one that you hear about a lot with quantum computing is encryption stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and you've probably heard about this, like
Yeah,
that
yeah,
there's
yeah.
like,
And I think the national repercussions of it as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
because a lot of encryption codes are based on like setting things that would take a classical computer like 20 years to systematically search through. Because
Right.
if any code can be broken if you have long enough, right? Like if you have long enough and you can test with a pen and paper every single possible
Possible
combination,
combination. Yeah.
then
Yeah.
yeah, you can crack anything, but it might take you 200 years. Like
Yeah.
it might take a computer 200 years because there's so many different factors. But
Yeah.
when you can leverage the amount of data and information that the same amount of bits can hold in a quantum
Mm-hmm.
computer, or sorry, qubits can hold,
Mm-hmm.
it again is exponentially faster. And
Mm-hmm.
so codes that might take hundreds of years to break with a classical computer could take a matter of hours with quantum
Wow.
computers.
So
And so,
obviously there are ethical repercussions to this.
yes,
Yeah.
and people are worried. Like people are very scared about the decryption power of quantum computing.
Yeah.
Because yeah, so many encryption techniques and algorithms are just built on the assumption it would take too long to crack. Like, yes, in
Mm.
theory you could do this, but it would just take too long.
And
And
that's your
so
security. Yeah.
that's your security. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Is that the hardware would fall apart before you could ever possibly crack this
Crack
open,
it.
kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so people are now working in the field of it's so fascinating because it's like as the field of quantum computing is being built, people are also now working in the field of quantum security. And like,
Mm.
what does it look like to build systems that are resistant to quantum
Quantum
computers
computers.
and
Damn.
that can
Okay.
withstand, and so that'll be really interesting, I think. And it's certainly uh there's no ceiling to, I think, cybersecurity stuff. Like we kind of think of like, oh, cybersecurity, like how big of a field can it be? But it's
It's
just going to get
getting there.
exponentially
Yep.
bigger as our decryption and code breaking software gets better and better. So
Mm.
again, this is not quantum computers aren't the kind of thing that everyone's going to have one in their lounge room. And a lot of, I think, one of the podcasts I was listening to with Michelle, where she was in an interview, the people on the podcast were like, everyone talks about quantum computers are going to be here in like the next 5 years. Like, what's the delay? And she was like, there's no delay. People are just overpromising.
Mm.
Um, and I was like, oh, that's too real. Like anyone who's worked in tech knows knows that feeling of like, I think
The
maybe you were
delivery
promised
aspect.
a delivery timeline that was a bit too tight, and that was
Yeah.
not realistic. And she's like, we're actually making progress incredibly fast. And
We do
so,
have quantum computers though, yeah?
and we have working quantum computers, yeah.
Yeah.
But there's really just like no use case to have them, like if for everyone to
Mm.
have them in their homes kind of thing. Like,
For
I
sure,
mean,
yeah.
maybe one day it's just like a super advanced calculator, and it's like maybe everyone needs one in 20 years, but like ultimately these are computers for research and for discovering new areas of computing and mathematics that we haven't even explored yet because we
Mm.
just haven't had the ability to try them, right? Like a lot of mathematics now is built using computers and using simulations, and people going, what if we did this and this and this? Would that work? And getting a computer to verify it.
Yeah.
And so quantum computing just opens up a whole new world of stuff that a computer can basically query.
Wow.
So yeah, that's some of the applications of quantum computing.
That is
We
so
really don't like
fascinating.
know where it might go. Like it's such a new kind of field and like technology and
Yeah.
it's the sky's the limit really. So
Yeah, we can understand why people are apprehensive about it. Wow. Thanks, Beth. I think you summarized that really well. It's a very complicated topic, so I feel like it's gonna come with homework of our own, but you did a really good job. That was really good.
thank you.
I'm
I'm
very
glad.
intrigued. I'm already just starting to like read up articles on like if quantum computers exist in
Mm.
2024 and their capabilities.
Yeah, they do. They
So
do
yeah.
exist.
Yeah, it's quite interesting to see where we're headed tech-wise.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's the end of our episode. Thank you for taking us through Michelle's wonderful achievements, and I can't wait to see where her company is going to get in 2030. Is there anything else you
Mm.
want to add, Beth?
I don't think so. Other than like, if you're interested in this stuff, go read about it because it is really fascinating and
Yeah, and if
a
you're
lot of good
working in this
resources.
stuff, you want to maybe reach out to us and probably explain me a couple more
Yeah.
concepts because I'll be happy.
If anyone has a quantum computer at home that I can play with, let me
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
That
that
would
could be pretty
be
cool.
super fun.
Yes. All right. We'll see you guys next time.
Thanks so much for joining us. All right. Bye.
Bye bye.